Mark, I was much struck by the changes announced to the Corporate Governance Code in January and the policy statement that preceded it from the FRC in last November. It seemed to me that in their language around proportionality, in their stress on comply or explain, there was really almost a retreat from prescription. They had consulted on potentially 18 different changes and only went forward with around half of them. It felt like a sort of high watermark had been reached all the way going back to the Cadbury Code in 1992. I just wondered what you make of these developments.
The governance framework in the UK market has been under an enormous amount of scrutiny over the last couple of years, I think in reflection of a number of different factors at play, but generally a recognition that London is becoming an increasingly unattractive place to list as a public company. And the governance framework and the way it's been framed and the debate around it really has been a reflection of a number of different stakeholders trying to make London more attractive as a place to list, because capital markets and the City of London have historically been incredibly important to the UK economy. And I think the changes that were made or weren't made that you referred to were a reflection of the fact that there was a recognition that the governance framework needed to be not just fit for purpose, but also internationally competitive and able to attract sorts of companies that might want to list maybe in the US market or elsewhere. But so to really try and focus on making London as most attractive as it possibly can be in terms of becoming a listed company.
Now, about 18 months ago, you and some colleagues were involved in a study, effectively, which I think the premise was that relationships between the boardroom and investors had broken down. How does that link into these corporate governance changes?
Well, I'd like to think that we were one of the catalysts to the conversation that I just referred to. So we interviewed 35 FTSE 100 chairs and 9 institutional investors, and we asked them a number of questions about how they felt about the state of stewardship. And there were some key themes that came out of that reflected, I think, concerns that were properly held by chairs, but also things that we could have further debate upon. Now, subsequent to that survey coming out, there have been a number of initiatives and quite a lot of commentators from various different informed positions have written about similar themes, and I think there has been some material progress in the relationship between boards and shareholders, but certainly we were one of the first to raise the concerns that I think are now well understood and views widely held.
So leopards can change their spots, that's what you're seeing? The institutional investors are, or the boardrooms, whichever, or both, are willing to change their behaviour?
I think there's been a recognition from the asset management industry that perhaps they got potentially too mired in the detail and were endeavouring to micromanage various different aspects of board decision making. Certainly the chairs that I speak to have said that whether it's as a result of our survey or other issues that have appeared in the media, that there has been an improvement in relationships and that the chairs and other board members are able to have more constructive conversations with their shareholders and talk about things where certainly the boards and the chairs feel it's more material in terms of the prospect for the company, rather than just getting bogged down in remuneration or some other aspect of minutiae detail that would have been the case 2 or 3 years ago.
And what about the proxy agencies? Because if you judge by some of the statements you read in the papers, they don't seem to have changed their tune that much, certainly when it comes to executive remuneration.
One of the key concerns that came out of the stewardship survey and was universally held absolutely by everybody that we interviewed from a chair's perspective was that when it came to resolutions, they didn't feel that the proxy voting agencies paid them enough respect, in as much as they would get notified at the 11th hour that they were ISS or Glass Lewis or whoever were going to vote against a resolution. And they felt that they didn't have enough time to respond, to put their case, and they felt that they didn't have a sufficiently senior person to engage with. And I think there is still some aspect of that, but certainly that is now much more in the spotlight than it was. And the role played by proxy voting agencies in the whole voting chain is now better understood by everybody and is under more scrutiny.
Mark, you've mentioned stewardship a few times already, and the FRC is conducting, as we speak, I think, a review into the stewardship code with a view to announcing a consultation in a few months' time. Where do you anticipate the focus being for that review, and what sort of outcomes might one be looking for or hoping for?
I think one of the interesting things that came out of the FRC's statement towards the back end of last year was a reaffirmation, if you like, of comply or explain. And I think boards had increasingly felt that it had become comply or else. And I think it's a really important issue for the FRC to reiterate, which is no company is the same. You know, the world isn't black and white, it's one big grey area. And companies have to pragmatically respond to the issues they uniquely face as companies in the businesses that they're in. All of that, to me, suggests that there's going to be, and I think this is absolutely welcomed by boards, is going to be a return in some part to the boards are appointed by shareholders to run the company and are held to account in the way they run the company, but they're not second guests in the way that they run the company. And that was one of the big frustrations that came out of our stewardship survey. So if a board's not doing its job, then you replace the people on the board. But what you don't do is appoint the board and then try and second guess them. The evolution of the stewardship debate, I hope, will, from an institutional investor's perspective, reinforce that as a kind of code of conduct.
So that would be to give more latitude to the boards?
I think to respect the structure as it was intended, which is, you know, as agents you appoint board members to run the company and you hold the board to account and you judge them on their progress and process. But what you don't do is try and intervene and second guess the decisions that they take.
And I guess, I mean, this whole governance and stewardship discussion is taking place against the backdrop of an even more fevered debate about the de-equitisation of the London stock market. I mean, how does that feed into the governance discussion in your view?
I think it's critically important, and I wouldn't underestimate the role that it plays. So broadly speaking, and I used to do this for a living, in the 1990s, UK pension funds had about 50 or 60% of their assets in UK equities. And today, UK pension funds have 2% in UK equities. So there's been a massive disinvestment from the UK stock market, and it's increasingly difficult for institutional investors to provide capital to companies who wish to raise capital. And every day, UK portfolio managers come in and they have to sell their portfolio. So there is no fresh money coming into the UK stock market. So I think that actually starts any conversation between a UK portfolio manager and a board from quite a dark position, because the whole industry is under an enormous amount of pressure, both regulatory and structural. So the fact that the London market is de-equitised, I think, makes stewardship a more difficult role to undertake as a matter of course, because the UK asset management industry is just in constant outflow. And unless we fix that, we can have the best regulatory framework in the world, but if we don't have any natural providers of long-term capital to companies that need it for long-term reasons, I think we will continue to struggle.
So why is this combination of governance and de-equitisation, and that's such a tortured topic in the UK, whereas the US, everybody seems to think is a much happier place to go, and they don't seem to have these same debates? I mean,
well, there's an equity culture in the US market. So the US equity market is obviously large, global, very deep pools of capital. The average US pension fund still has 50% in US equities. And there's oxygen provided to the system every day. For whatever reason, we find ourselves now where the City of London, which is still an important contributor to the UK economy, now finds itself really on the back foot because there is a lack of investment in UK companies. And we need to find a way to turn the taps on and to get money flowing back into the UK stock market. And I think by doing that, a lot of pressure will get taken off of the governance debate. And I think we'd all feel a lot better about the outlook.
so we're likely to have a new government in the coming months. If you had the ear of the Chancellor, what advice would you be offering to deal with these issues we've been discussing?
Well, whoever comes in, they'll face the same issue, which is we've got net debt to GDP of 100%, and we need to grow. We need to grow tax revenues to provide money to invest in the things that we need to invest in. So I would be looking at measures that would stimulate growth and I would look at measures that would stimulate investment, and maybe some form of stick to get UK pension funds investing in UK equities will be one of the things I would consider whoever ends up being Chancellor. There have been some debates about the fact that there are very significant tax advantages provided to pension funds who then go and invest globally. Maybe those tax advantages should be provided to pension funds that are investing in UK equities specifically rather than investing globally, so that we provide money for the Tesco's and the Pearsons and the Rolls Royces of this world rather than Amazon and so on and so forth, where pension funds currently invest. Most pension funds, the top 10 holdings are international companies, not UK companies.
Mark, thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. I'm sure we'll return to these topics again later in the year.